The labor movement has really embraced us and given us a platform to talk about this, and it's been really moving and awesome.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Really excited for this next conversation. The Imperfect Paradise is an award-winning weekly narrative podcast showcasing California stories with universal significance, hosted by Antonia Carajito. Each deeply reported story is driven by characters who illuminate aspects of American identity and underscore California's reputation as a home for dreamers and schemers, its heartbreaking inequality, its varied and diverse communities, its unique combination of dense cities and wild places, and new episodes premiere on Wednesdays with broadcasts on LAist 89.3 the following Sunday. So this podcast is actually on the radio as well, so that's interesting. LAist Studios' Imperfect Paradise Strippers Union tells the story of a group of dancers who came together over unsafe working conditions to unionize a strip club in North Hollywood. The podcast series follows several dancers at the Star Garden Topless Dive Bar, their fight against club owners to create a new labor model for stripping and the people who got left behind along the way. We have on the line now Emma Alabaster, the lead reporter for this podcast series, and Chevelle, a worker at the Star Garden Topless Bar. Chevelle and Emma, welcome to the program. Really appreciate y'all taking the time to talk to us today.
Good. Glad to be here.
Yeah, really glad to have you. And so, I guess we were reached out to, by the podcast company, and so Emma, I'll start with you, and if you could, what was it that made you want to do an in-depth reported podcast series on the topic of the unionization of Star Garden? What was it about the story that popped to you that you said, this is something that I want to write about, that I want to share with people?
Sure. I have to give a shout out to my coworker, Natalie Chudnovsky, who's the senior producer of the series. She actually started the reporting process on it, and then looped me in, and I was immediately really excited. Before I worked in podcasting as an audio producer and a journalist, I am a musician, and so I have a performance background, and then I also have been involved in different kinds of movement work. And so the story really appealed to me. And I think that a lot of the way that we tell labor stories in the media can be a little flattened. And so one thing that I love about long form narrative podcasting is that we get to go deeper. And so I was really excited to get 4 episodes to go behind the headlines and get more of the story and hear directly from the dancers, like Chevelle, who unionized the club.
Right. And so, Chevelle, you are part of now one of is it 2? I think it is 2 unionized strip clubs in the entire country. So obviously we're, you probably don't know much about our program, but we're a union radio program. Both of us are union members on this program. We're on the radio, right? We're union members. I'm president of the Labor Council here in North Alabama, right? So, I think every worker deserves a union. Every worker should unionize, but not everybody does. And so far, that has not been something that has happened in the, in strip clubs across the country. It's just not been something that has been done. So, can you talk to us about, like, what were some of the conditions that agitated you to try to be interested in changing? But then what connected that to seeing unionization as a solution, right? Because I imagine, I know people who know strippers, and like complaining about work is a pretty universal thing, right? But then going the next step and actually doing a union about it is, just factually unique. So what were the things that were agitating about the experience, and then what connected that to the solution of unionization as you saw it?
Yeah, so we were fighting for safer working conditions. Our boss was turning a blind eye to customer misconduct, and it was putting us in very threatening situations. And it came to a head after two of us were fired for bringing up these issues. So nobody felt safe at work. Everyone was at risk for losing their job. And so um, I had learned about the Lusty Lady in San Francisco and learned about unionizing many years before. And I had actually campaigned at a different club in that campaign. I mean, it never went public. So the organizing drive ended when COVID hit. But I learned a lot about it. And to me, and you would probably sympathize as a union person, that unionizing is the way to change the workplace, to fight the boss, change the workplace. And so that's why I still feel very strongly that it's a good path forward for the industry to actually hold these bosses accountable, to get the safer working conditions we want, to get the anti-discrimination, anti-racism changes we want to the club. And of course, it's a huge fight, especially in an industry that has been the conditions have gotten worse and worse over the decades since the Lusty Lady. And we're fighting an uphill battle against employment law issues. Like there's turnover in the industry. There's like all the elements that make it difficult to organize are present present in our industry. But we've been able to do a lot of cool stuff in our campaign. We even got one of our undocumented workers like a work authorization through the deferred action program. So we hope that our campaign is going to kind of light the way forward.
Yeah, wow, that's I mean that last part in particular is really impressive because that's not, that's a very kind of that's a pretty difficult thing to do, actually, to get an undocumented person in this country a work authorization. Was that for were you able to get that because of reporting some sort of worker or some sort of workplace malfeasance, or what were the logistically, how did that happen?
Yeah, so I think it's a relatively new program. But it's DALE, Deferred Action for a Labor something, but that's the acronym. So any kind of labor dispute, like if you file a ULP, if you have a grievance, an outstanding grievance, I believe that is also covered. But for those things, you are protected against deportation, and she received a social security number. So now she's working at Universal Studios theme park, like in the Harry Potter world. Like it's
Oh, that's awesome.
it's been a life changer for her. And we have a lot of undocumented workers in our industry, and through unionizing, I mean, so people are always afraid of losing their jobs. But when you unionize, like it's supposed to be the status quo. No one's supposed to get fired. And in that process, if you've got a bunch of undocumented workers, the cool possible model is that we could bring all those people, we could get all those people's social security numbers. So I feel very I'm very excited for her and excited for the possibility of like bringing more workers into, to bringing more workers into like relative safety in the job force. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's an exciting program for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's incredibly exciting. And so what were some of the first conversations that you started having, around the topic of unionization, and how were you the one that started those conversations, or how did that, how did that ball get rolling?
Yeah, I was actually sort of a salt. Reagan, my coworker, came to me. I had worked at Star Garden years ago, and then I was fired for actually bringing up a issue with employment law. But so she brought me in. We had worked together at Jumbo's, trying to unionize Jumbo's before the pandemic. And then I was there for about 6 weeks, and then she was fired. Then I was, went to her and I was like, "Hey, I think this might be the moment. I know that you've been fired, and but I think this is like a point to rally around," because everyone was pretty devastated about it. She was bringing in really great customers. And she's just a great performer and overall very great at her job. So everyone was shocked that she could be fired so easily, and everyone felt unsure and like was angry about it. So that was kind of a flashpoint. And then that's when I proposed in the group chat about unionizing, and just shared a long message. This is what the process is. And there was a lot of support for it. Surprisingly, people were really down. And so then we started meeting. It was only like 3 weeks later that we actually went filed or gave our petition to the boss. We delegated the boss. So.
Mm. And so did y'all go on strike before you actually had the successful union election, or what was, kind of chronologically, you have this, this person gets fired and you bring up the idea of unionization, and eventually, you do have an election, you win the union election, and my understanding is that y'all have gone on multiple strikes. And so what was that like, getting the workers there to be willing to take that action? And what was the result? Were those strikes successful?
Well, the first was actually a lockout. It was because we were picketing, it kind of became known as, we called ourselves Stripper Strike NoHo, and then in the local community, people saw us picketing, and they thought, they started calling us like the Stripper Strike. But it was a lockout. We petitioned the boss, and then they, basically, they wouldn't let any of us work again. So, they put up a little red rope across the door on the first night after we delivered the petition to come back to work. So, we were locked out for, 15 months, and then we got our jobs back through the union process, and through the NLRB. So that was actually interesting because every worker is afraid of losing their job. And we all sort of lost our job for a number of months, right off the bat, but it would actually ended up being a really positive experience, and brought us together. We had a super successful strike fund. We raised money to cover rent for months. And that was by like activating our community and engaging our community. And so like the picket line became this really vibrant community space, and it connected us. The Stripper Co-op, which is our worker owned project, that grew as a result of the strike, and we have a lot of momentum going on that side of things. So and to workers who are thinking about this and wondering if they can do it, strippers and service workers in general have such a strong connection to our customers, and those people are the ones that are supporting us in the club, and they really turned out for us during this whole process. And through the co-op, we're sustaining ourselves in a worker-owned business, directly with our customers. So it really created strengthened that connection and strengthened our community. And since then we had to go on one short ULP strike, just to kind of make a point with the NLRB. So far we're still in the legal battle side of things, but yeah. So in terms of success, it's been a unique situation, which I'm sure you're going to ask questions about it.
Yeah, well, actually, Emma, don't let me forget. I want to come back and I want to touch on, there's something that was mentioned about some people felt some sort of way because there are there are people who work in strip clubs of all different sorts of from all sorts of backgrounds and demographics, and so this is not something that I had seen, but apparently there has been criticism or people feeling some sort of way about a group of like white women unionizing while, other strippers are not doing that. And so I'm interested in that criticism and how, or I don't know, it seems weird to call it a criticism, but just a lament. I'm interested in that. But before we do that, you mentioned, Chevelle, about the community and the community support. And so talk to us a little bit about that, because I can imagine that it would be like, I imagine that there would be lines there that, you have customers and in a strip club, and, you want your customers to come out and support you, but how do you keep that line from being crossed into, like, kind of going into some weird territories? And then the labor movement locally, how supportive have they been? Have you seen, the labor movement in the area support it? Because, again, I could imagine, some reactions that would honestly not be great from some people in the movement. So I'm interested in both of those things, the community response as far as like folks who go to the club, and how do you kind of keep those lines, and then the response and support, or potentially lack thereof, from the labor movement and other generally like kind of progressive organizations and communities.
Yeah, so the picket line, we called it the sidewalk strip club. So those same kind of like, I guess we were performing on the sidewalk, we were dressing up. So those kind of, I guess, boundaries around our professional versus personal life persisted. And our regular customers were out there supporting us, and it was one of our regulars was there from start to end every night, helping us pack up, walking us to our cars. So that was really cool. And yeah, so our regulars were there for us, both supporting us financially, and then also on the picket line. And the labor movement was awesome, actually. When we announced the campaign with Actors Equity, there was some pushback from Actors Equity members who were more conservative. And I think in the past, Actors Equity hasn't been really a fighting union, but that's changing, which is really exciting. So we did receive some pushback within Equity, but otherwise, we were invited to speak at the Labor Notes conference just a few months after we started the campaign. And that was an incredible experience. And yeah, just the labor movement has really embraced us, and given us like a platform to talk about this. And it's been really moving and awesome.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
That's great. And also big fans of Labor Notes here. We just got back from the 2024 convention. I don't know if you were able to go to that one, but we were also at the 2022 convention. So big fans of Labor Notes, and no surprise there that they've been supportive. They're great. So yeah, Emma, just zooming out a little bit, talk to us about some of the reaction from other communities to this union attempt, because just to be honest, it's difficult for me to see like that there would be a criticism. I'm not sure, like, so explain to me like what's going on with that kind of narrative line through the podcast and this story as it's been developing.
Sure. So one thing I'll say is Star Garden is a really specific club, and the stripping industry, there's a lot of variety in terms of what kinds of clubs people work at and what those working conditions are like. And my understanding from talking to strippers at different clubs is that everybody wants to be paid well and to have a safe working environment. And those are issues that come up across clubs in different ways. But not everyone agrees on how to make those things happen. So some specifics about Star Garden: it's a smaller club, it's a dive bar. And there's a lot of racial segregation among strip clubs, as with many industries. So sometimes people refer to urban clubs, which are more clubs that play hip hop and have more Black dancers and Black customers, versus rock and roll clubs. I'm doing air quotes here, which are more catering to a white clientele and having more white dancers. And Star Garden is more of a rock and roll club. And a lot of the dancers I spoke to said that they experienced discriminatory hiring practices at the club. So most of the dancers were white, and there were some dancers of color, but there were no Black dancers hired under the current management. And we did reach out to the management for interviews for the podcast. They declined to talk, but we did speak with their lawyer. And so some of her answers are in the podcast as well. But so that was one issue at the club. And so then when the dancers went on strike, they were a mostly white group. And they got a lot of media attention, right? And that's part of what the podcast is doing as well. And I think there were other dancers who had been organizing in different ways for a long time. So there's one dancer we speak to in the podcast whose name is Kat Hollis. And Kat started a movement in Portland, Oregon called PDX stripper strike, and that was inspired by NYC stripper strike. And so these strikes were not strikes in a traditional labor movement sense in terms of like a work stoppage, but were more so about movements putting pressure on clubs across their respective cities to call for an end to discriminatory hiring practices and colorism and issues like that in the clubs. And they were using the word strike to, I think, refer to more of a labor strike, but also to talk about like fighting back and like a blow. And so I think one thing that happened is, as Chevelle said, because when the dancers at Star Garden went on strike, they were referring to themselves as NoHo, as in North Hollywood stripper strike. Some dancers thought that that was appropriative of this more Black-led movement of these stripper strikes that had been popping up across the country. So that was one issue that came up. And then the other issue that we dive into in the show is, especially in California, there's a lot of tension about independent contractor versus employee status. There was a law that was passed in 2020 in California called AB5, also known as the Gig Workers Bill. And it was meant to target rideshare companies like Uber and Lyft. And, these companies that, as we know, there's a rise in gig work across the country. And there are all these companies that are essentially treating workers as employees, but paying them as independent contractors. And this law passed in California that pretty much overnight turned a lot of contract workers into employees. And that included strip clubs. And so the way that strip clubs responded to this law, differed from club to club, but it seems like a lot of clubs, fired a lot of their workers because they thought that they couldn't afford to keep as many people on if they had to pay them as employees. And who was fired? Some dancers we spoke to said that a lot of the more marginalized workers were fired. So dancers of color, disabled dancers, trans and gender nonconforming dancers like that. And then there were other ways that clubs responded to this law that made working conditions a lot worse for a lot of dancers. So we speak to one dancer in particular on the podcast, Onyx Black, who has an organization called Artists Revolt. And she's been organizing against AB5 to either get a carve out for strip clubs or to get it repealed completely. It's complicated because across the country, even in states that don't have AB5, there are dancers who have sued their clubs, and most of the time it is ruled that they were being misclassified. In other words, they're being treated as employees, even if they're being paid as contractors. So across the board, most clubs probably are treating their dancers as employees, whether or not they're paying them that way. And as you all probably know, it's easier to unionize if you're an employee, right? And so that's part of how these two conversations about unionizing a club versus this particular law come head to head. And so, I think one thing that's particular about the stripping industry, like other kinds of service industries, is that it does draw a lot of marginalized workers who need money quickly, who want to be able to make their own hours or come in and out of work or work at multiple places. And, as we're hearing from Chevelle, also like unionizing is often a lot of work and takes a lot of time. Those dancers were, on the sidewalk outside of the club for 15 months, and the struggle is continued even after getting the union. And so I think it's a real investment. And obviously, marginalized workers across industries make that investment in having a union campaign. But to me, as someone who I personally was raised in a very pro-labor background, I was really surprised to hear marginalized workers really critiquing this strategy of pushing for a union. And to me, it really highlighted the issues in this country with the ways that our rights are so often tied to our workplaces. And, for example, we spoke to a researcher named Alana Turner, who does research specifically on strippers in California and their reactions to AB5. And she said she would ask people, well, don't you want healthcare? And they'd say, yeah, I want healthcare. I just don't want it tied to the club that I work at. And so I think, unionizing might allow workers to, in theory, be able to get healthcare from their club, but then it makes them feel like they are also stuck at that workplace when they might want to work there more short term, or they might want to work at several clubs. And so I think, those are some of the tensions that we explore within the show.
Interesting. So, Chevelle, how have y'all, kind of responded to these tensions and explored them? And then also I'm wondering if, so the trade unions have a really interesting model that is very different from industrial unions, where you have a group of workers and the boss decides who is hired, and then you then you unionize, or you don't in some cases. And so my union is like the latter, right? I am a worker in a workplace. I was hired by my boss, and there's a union there, and so I join the union, and I get my health care through the employer and all of this stuff. But the building trades, their signatory contractors are, they represent the contractors' workers, but really what happens is the contractors give the building trades unions a call, and they say, hey, I need 50 iron workers, 100 electrical workers, 20 bricklayers, and 10, whatever, right? And then they fill the call, and they get their health care their pension and all that through the union, and all the contractors, the businesses, they put into the fund per hour worked for the pension and the healthcare and everything like that. So I'm wondering if has there been any conversation about, like, maybe that's kind of a model that the unions in our industry could utilize if there is a concern about the healthcare being tied to a single employer, or just. And I know that you're exploring the worker cooperative model, and so maybe that's kind of the answer that you've come to. But yeah, how are y'all at Star Garden exploring these tensions and working them out?
Well, yeah. So the signatory, what you bring up about that is really interesting. Actors Equity does work on more of, when there is union density, more of like that SAG-AFTRA kind of thing, where they bargain contracts with industry wide, and then you can go to club. So that would be ultimately an end goal, an exciting one. I wanted to talk about the employee versus independent contractor status, because there is still a lot of, so when AB5 passed, first of all, we were independent contractors at Star Garden. And our employer offered us 2 contracts. They said, you can be an employee and you can earn minimum wage, but then we're going to give you a dance quota and we're going to take all your dance money for the first $200 that you sell. Or you can be an independent contractor and you can keep 50% of your dances from the get-go. So when people talk about AB5 being strip clubs in California, I really look at clubs piggybacked on the Uber and Lyft narrative about, this is going to take away your schedule flexibility. This is going to, change everything for the worse. And it's true that clubs, when they changed to AB5, they fired a lot of their marginalized dancers. But for me, that's squarely on the shoulders of the bosses. They made this decision to implement the law the way that they did. And they did it because they were doing it because they wanted to whitewash their clubs. They wanted to put in these dance quotas and they wanted to make more money off of the dancers. And that's what's happened. But it's not because of AB5, in my view. It's because they took this opportunity as like a cash grab and they wanted to whitewash their clubs. Because a lot of clubs in California still operate on independent contractor status. So there is no enforcement that these clubs are running from. So that's my view of it. And that's why I think that organizing, we're going to have to ultimately hold these bosses accountable. And any dancer in the US, as far as the NLRB can unionize. So it's not that if you are considered an employee at your club, it's like that door is open to you. Actually, federally, that door is open to you whether or not your state employment law calls you an employee. As far as we've seen, and the NLRB, it wasn't even like a big issue when we had our union campaign. It was sort of like checking the boxes. It's like, so it wasn't something we were ever worried about in terms of NLRB seeing us as employees. So just to kind of like address that, because that the reporting around employment status and journalists kind of being focusing on that issue has been a little bit frustrating for me because of the way that federal law and employment law, like labor law and employment law, does and doesn't interact. But anyway, so with when we do get union density, that would be really cool to have. You would have the flexibility, different clubs, provided you always have to bargain a contract, and that's the hard stage that we're in now. But we are also facing a boss that is really fighting us tooth and nail, and is sort of like a worst case scenario boss. He doesn't care about his business. He's trashed it in order to try to bust the union. So if your boss cares about your club and wants to make money off of your club and is making a living off of your club, you have a lot more leverage than in our case, where our boss has a bunch of real estate holdings and is probably, the club is probably a front for some kind of criminal money laundering or something. So we're not working under and this is why worker ownership is so important, because in these, and it's not uncommon in the industry that this is the case. And so we really need to be ready to take over these clubs. And I'm not saying that was not the goal going into this. We wanted a union contract. But if the boss is willing to shut down the club or go into bankruptcy or something because they can, and they don't, they just have much about not working with the union, we need to have a strategy to be able to, either transition into a club where the workforce is worker owned, if it's not at that location, or strategize to actually assume the business to carry on the union.
Right. Well, I saw Emma have a look, so maybe we're going to be getting some follow-up investigation on is Star Garden a criminal front? So I'll be looking for that reporting from Emma.
I don't know about that, but that's the first I'd heard that theory.
So that's primarily, Chevelle, been the conversation about worker ownership, is that, you know, if this employer is willing to drive it into the ground, you know, that's kind of what we're thinking about this as a strategy to combat that.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Is there anything else, you know, Chevelle, that you think folks here ought to know, actually? And somebody brought this up in our chat, but a couple of weeks ago, actually, like 2 or 3 weeks ago in Birmingham, dancers filed a lawsuit at a strip club. Birmingham's just like an hour and a half south of here, for $100,000 in stolen wages, house fees, and other labor violations. Is there anything that you would say to you know, our audience here in Alabama, Louisiana, and Kentucky about y'all's campaign, and any lessons that folks who work in strip clubs can take, and folks who work in other industries can take from what y'all are going through?
Yeah. And actually I actually sued Star Garden after I was fired the first time for like wage and hour violations. And that's something that strippers do a lot, and they win, like Emma was saying. But the frustration there is that these lawsuits don't get your job back, and they don't often change the club, because these clubs actually budget to settle these lawsuits, and then they carry on business as usual. So anywho, I'm glad that those workers are taking action, and just to kind of put that in context. And yeah, I also didn't get a chance to follow up about the criticism that we received. And I do regret using the stripper strike name. I think that was a mistake. And, you know, we're sorry for that. And we did our best to try to highlight those different movements, but we could have done more. And I also learned through the podcast about the, you know, Kat Hollis's strategy of really focusing on mutual aid. And that is super important for marginalized workers who want to participate in these kind of movements, and it's foundational. So I really applaud the work that they're doing up there. And yeah, as far as takeaways, I think, you know, just using our power as service workers, that connection with our customers, building community, and really, you know, when you're talking about a transformation of society in a move towards, you know, socialism or anarchism, you know, or whatever, it's going to be grounded in community. And so I think that's really the biggest takeaway for me is that we have, you know, within the strip club, if you remove the boss, it's us and it's our customers. And since the strip club isn't paying us anyway, that's really what it is anyway. So, right. You know, like, we want to change our clubs and we want to get those good contracts. But, you know, our community will really sustain us in or out of the club. So, and we already have that. So that's an exciting thing to kind of take away, I think.
And Emma, was there anything else that you wanted to make sure that you left our listeners with? Anything that maybe surprised you in your reporting, or any other lessons or pieces of information that you felt would be important for folks to know?
Yeah, I'll give one more plug for the podcast. I think we're able to get more deep into some of the backstory of what led to the unionization. We get to meet a bunch of the different dancers that were involved in that, and hear about the really supportive community that was built even before Chevelle sent that first text, right? Suggesting that folks unionize, that built the foundation that people were able to organize on top of. I also think it's really, notable that Chevelle said that she tried to unionize on another club previously that originally hadn't been reported on. And I think that was not surprising to me as someone who has organizing background, right? A lot of the time you have to have failed campaigns before you can win one. There's a lot of, I think, lessons that can be learned by other dancers, but also by anyone in any industry. I mean, I remember when the dancer Reagan was doing an interview, our recording engineer saying, "Oh my God, the whole time I was listening, this reminded me so much of experiences I had working in recording studios," right? There are specifics of the strip club environment, but I think a lot of the issues are relatable across industries and applicable across industries. I think it is really interesting in terms of a story about an industry that has really little union density and the sort of possibilities and also limits of what that means. In episode 3, we get to hear about what the opening night was like at Star Garden when it reopened as a union strip club, and all of the hijinks that ensued there, which included chanting and union songs from the stage. That is a night I will never forget. And then in episode 4, we explore more of this worker-owned cooperative model, and get to hear a little bit about what Chevelle and some Star Garden dancers and other dancers have been building there, and what they're hoping for, and how worker cooperatives work in general. So I hope folks will give a listen. It came out in February, so if you look back in the Imperfect Paradise feed, wherever you get your podcasts, you'll be able to find Strippers Union.
Fantastic. Emma Alabaster, Chevelle. The podcast is Imperfect Paradise. There's a 4-part series on the strippers unions in North Hollywood at Star Garden. Thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.